You're listening to the Recovered Life Show, the show that helps people in recovery live their best recovered lives. And here is your host, Damon Frank.
And welcome back to the Recovered Life Show. I'm pleased to have my guest on today, interventionist Eric Reinhart. He's located in San Diego. Welcome to the show. So glad to have you.
Thanks, Damon. I'm so glad to be here. I'm glad we got to make it work.
Well, I'm thrilled to have you on because I want to talk about an important topic today that happens to a lot of people that are in recovery, Eric. You know, they get into recovery, people around them see that they are recovered, that they're doing it, that recovery is working. And there's that family member, that friend that you're doing an intervention on, that you're saying, hey, you know what? Maybe this isn't working for you. And being so hopeful that it's worked out for you and other people that you see in recovery, you think it's going to work all the time. But unfortunately, sometimes, as you're going to tell us, it doesn't work out like that. And people either say no or they make an attempt and it doesn't work. So glad to have you on today to really talk about this topic. And what do you do, Eric, if they say no or it doesn't work?
Yeah. Well, Damon, that's a good question. And that does happen, more often sometimes than we would like. However, when I do interventions, I'm working with the entire family system. I have some clinical framework as a marriage family therapist as well. And I kind of bring that into my dialogue and my preparation during the meetings with the family and really get them all on board of what the process is going to look like. And I tell them, guys, there's a possibility your loved one may not go to treatment. And this is what we have to do, to get them to see their need for treatment. And it's all about kind of coming up with those boundaries, those limits, and creating bottom lines, if you would, to get the loved one to see that the family can't be hijacked by you any longer. The addiction has hijacked that loved one, and the family has kind of been hijacked by them. So it's a family disease in that regard. So it's all about learning, for everyone to be comfortable being uncomfortable, right? Because in the whole intervention process, it's an uncomfortable process. We're going to make some changes because if nothing changes, nothing changes. But we want to make some changes in this individual and this family system's life. So,
what's interesting, Eric, is that I think a lot of people think that, especially people who are not in recovery, think, well, the intervention really, when you intervene on somebody, and an intervention, let's just be clear about that. An intervention could be a family hiring somebody like you to come in and do kind of a more produced event, right? Or it could just be two friends talking or two family members talking, saying, hey, I've reached into the road, right? Intervention can be a lot of things. But I think people think overwhelmingly that interventions are really for the people who have an issue with alcohol and drugs, but it's not just that, right? It's really also for the people that are also doing the family unit that you're talking about. They also have to go into a recovery plan.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's one of the, I think, common misconceptions, as you mentioned, Damon. When I talk to the families about intervention and I tell them these are the things that I'm going to ask you to do as well to make some changes, because everyone's a spoken the will. Right. So we're all making a change in that process. And I always tell them, if your loved one, let's say his name's John, if your loved one, John, and you're wanting him to make some changes, to get on a path of healing and recovery, what does that look like for you? How are you going to support John in his healing and recovery path? So these are the things I'm going to ask you all to do. And again, I know we all came into this thinking it was just about John, but it's not. And when John will kind of see that, wow, my family, they're willing to do some things too and make some changes and actually take some accountability, because that's what it's about. It's about that accountability piece, not just for the individual, but for the family. And I tell the families, guys, we're asking John to take accountability and to go to treatment for, whatever he's struggling with at this time. So I need you all to take some accountability as well and just discuss what, if any, piece that you may have had in regards to what's happened with John. And sometimes, the families, they have a little bit of resistance, a little bit of pushback about that. And I'm like, guys, no one's here to judge. No one's here to blame. No one's here to shame or attack you or John. We're here to present our love, our worry, and our concern about what's been happening with him and why it is he's been using. And however, most of the time in my intervention process, there's some kind of family dynamic there or something that has happened, that has really contributed to that person using. And so being able to talk about it amongst ourselves in that family process and going over it together, is a beautiful thing. And it's healing and cathartic for everyone involved. And that's what I love about doing the interventions. I get to see that transformational change, not just with John, but with that whole family system. So it's an incredible process to be involved in and be part of. And I just feel so grateful, and honored to be part of those families making those changes.
Eric, it's interesting because I think a lot of the times that, we have a little slogan here, a little thing that we say on the Recovered Life show in several episodes where I've rarely met an alcoholic that doesn't have a codependent family member. Rarely, right? And if you've grown up in a house that has alcoholism, you're either gonna find a codependent, or during the intervention, you're gonna challenge somebody else's alcoholism, that they go, well, John isn't as bad as I am. So if John has to get sober, what does that mean for me? Right. Can you talk about that whole interwoven dysfunction? Because it's really, like we were saying, like you're pointing out, it's not just the person who has a drug and alcohol problem that has to recover. There's other people typically in the family. It doesn't usually come from nowhere.
Absolutely. And that's a great point, Damon. And I'm glad you brought that up. It's a family disease, and oftentimes there's a genetic predisposition to it. So let's say John's, dad or uncle or grandfather, whoever it was, struggle with alcoholism or addiction themselves. In the intervention process, I often, ask that person, look, again, no one's here to blame, shame, or judge you. I'm just asking you to take a little bit of accountability in this process so John will feel more comfortable doing the same. So if you're willing to accept, your part in what's happened and discuss how you've had challenges with it, that will help John come to that decision for himself to make those changes, right? And there's been times, Damon, where I've actually gotten 2, 3, even 4 people into treatment before during the intervention process because there were other families and or friends that were struggling, with their own addiction. And it came to light during the intervention process, which was really, amazing to see that. And one thing I hear often from the person who's being intervened on, the individual themselves, like John, is that if I, hearing my loved one admit their own struggles with it really helped me because it showed that I wasn't alone and I didn't feel as singled out and ostracized by the family, because I always felt like they were casting judgment on me, and not really taking ownership of their own struggle. And that really helped that person, be able to surrender to the disease of alcohol and drug addiction. So it's just really an incredible process to see that. So really great point that you brought up. I love to see that happen in the family systems.
It's really tough, I think, for a lot of people to grasp alcoholism. Like, I personally am an alcoholic, right? So I know that I am physically different from my fellows. So something happens to me that doesn't happen to other people around me that are not alcoholics when I drink alcohol, right? That first sip, something actually happens to me, right? And I know even when I got sober, and I didn't do it through an intervention and I didn't do it through a rehab, I wasn't fortunate enough to have those. But when I did it, there were family members that were just like dumbfounded by it. They really thought, and this was even in the 90s, that they thought that, like, well, this is some sort of moral issue. This is some sort of thing. This is just a lack of personal control. And if you could double down on it, which kills alcoholics, right? Then everything is going to be okay. It was really hard. And there were certain people in my family that I really could not, they never really got to the point where they really understood what alcoholism was, although they had been affected by alcohol. They either were an alcoholic, not outing anybody or saying, that's a personal choice, obviously, decision about if they are or not, but they have that outwardly, that you could see it, or they've been affected by somebody in their life that was an alcoholic, but yet they still have this belief that it's some sort of like moral issue.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
or self-control issue.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I definitely have had that happen before. Well, why can't he just stop? What is it about it? Why don't they just stop drinking? I don't get it, and I have a lot of family members who get really frustrated and angry, about that person struggling. And one of the things that I say first and foremost to them in the intervention process, because we do a pre-intervention meeting, and that takes, several hours to get everyone on the same page. We kind of go over the intervention process with a fine-tooth comb. And I explained to them, guys, when someone's an alcoholic or addict, choice is out the window. They're not choosing necessarily to drink all the time, and do these things. When they do drink, the problem is oftentimes they can't stop, but they're drinking for a reason. And the reasons we don't know sometimes. It could be they're trying to numb out some emotions and feelings or some kind of trauma that have happened, because oftentimes the alcoholic or addict, there's some kind of underlying condition, such as trauma or some kind of mental health or some kind of past childhood issue. We don't know what we don't know. But what we're trying to do is we're trying to get to that root cause, right? We're trying to get, John in this situation to treatment so he can peel back the layers of the onion to get to the root cause of what he's drinking in the first place for. So that's the process. And I get them to see, like, guys, when we're going into this, I don't want you to be angry. If you're angry, I can't have you be part of it. Right. We're not trying to be angry about him, and we're not trying to say you should just stop. And, there's no reason to have to go through treatment. I can do it on my own. Why can't you? Because that's casting that blame and that judgment. And that's not fair, because there is a physical and a physiological and emotional and psychological component, to someone who struggles with addiction. That neurochemistry has often been changed in the brain in that dopamine response. And they keep drinking because it's a vicious cycle. And then oftentimes with alcoholics, when they keep drinking, they can't stop. And the problem is, if they keep drinking a lot, sometimes they have to have more of it in their system so they don't have these withdrawal symptoms, right? And withdrawal symptoms can be dangerous. So it's a vicious cycle. They just sometimes can't stop without getting medical and professional help. So I kind of explained that to the families to get them to see, if someone is struggling with, cancer, you're going to try to get to the best treatment center you can to treat the cancer. Well, alcohol and addiction is like a progressive disease and an illness. Yeah. If you can treat it, you can't cure it, but you can treat it, right? And you can put it in remission. But you got to manage
absolutely.
You got to manage it just like an illness, like a diabetes. Alcoholics and addicts have to monitor themselves on a daily basis to make sure they're managing what's going on, so they can stay sober and stay in the recovery. It's not something that's just going to change overnight. It's not something that's just going to change by, saying I can do this, I'm done. It's something that they have to have help for, and it's a longevity.
So Eric, let's get right down to the real drama part of this, which I'm sure people that tune in want to hear is, what if you do all this and they say, no, thank you. I'd rather just drink myself to death, and we hear all these stories all the time that, hey, people were intervened on, they got sober, it worked the first time, it was all great, it was super easy. But really, that's not the case a lot of the times. A lot of the times, people flat out say no. And the family's left a lot of times bewildered. They're pissed off because they've spent all of this time and money to try to make this happen. All this emotional, they feel that they've extended the olive branch time and time again. And now they've just been told flat out, nope, I'm not interested in doing that. What then, Eric? What then? Does it just end?
Great question, Damon. And that does happen, So what I tell the families is, going into the intervention, guys, they're going to go to treatment or they're not. But again, as I talk to them about, this intervention process isn't just about them. It's about you all. And it's about making some changes in your life. We can't control addiction. You can't cure it. You didn't create it. You didn't cause it. And you can't change it. Right. But you can contribute to it in a negative way by enabling behavior and kicking can down the road, or a positive way by doing what you're doing to do the intervention. So what we're going to do here is we're going to do this intervention. And if they say no, we're going to have a choice. And it's not about tough love. It's about making a tough choice with love. And what that consists of is putting in those boundaries and those limits and even consequences if needed.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to give you an example of one that just happened with me about a week and a half ago. We did the intervention. It was a great, intervention process. Several families together, blended families, almost like the Brady Bunch times three, if you would. You know, different aunts, uncles, cousins, stepsisters, stepbrothers. Different marriages, all these different things. And the person said they didn't want to go to treatment. So we, implemented the consequences. And this person, had lived a pretty well life, right? Had lots of things given to them and things like that. There was some entitlement there as well. And I see that, kind of often sometimes. And so when they said they didn't want to go to treatment, I said, okay, that's great. I said, if that's what you choose, however, here's what your family has to do now. Now they have a choice and they are choosing to support your recovery, not your addiction any longer. And this is what your mom and your dad and your aunts and uncles and cousins and siblings are wanting to do now. So please, if you would, just listen to them with an open heart and hear what they have to say. And so then I get the family members to explain to them, what they're willing to do and not do anymore. And I talk to the family. I say, if you're going to say it, you got to stick to it. If you can't stick to it and adhere to this consequence or limit, then don't say it, because that becomes an empty thing, right? So the family agreed that they would not support the addiction any longer. They were cutting off all financial resources. They were going to cut off the phone. The car is out of the question now. No insurance, no car anymore. And the person could not come home to live with them. And that person was really devastated because, they had a very comfortable life and they were comfortable in their addiction. But see, that's the thing. When people are comfortable, they don't make changes. If you fall down and you hit a cushy landing, why would you make a change? Right. But if you fall down and you hit kind of a harder landing, that's discomfort. And that discomfort is going to get you to motivate to make change often. So we got to make someone a little bit uncomfortable make a change. So what the family decided they would do, they didn't want to kick him out. They didn't want him to be homeless on the streets. So we came up with an equal medium. And I thought it was a great compromise. They said, we can't be here any longer. We're going to take you to a homeless shelter. So we took the young man to the homeless shelter. And Damon, what do you think happened after that?
You decided to go to treatment.
Within 2 days, Damon, within 2 days, not even 2 days, a day and a half. What happened was he called, saying he didn't like it there. It wasn't for him. He wasn't comfortable. The parents, along with my coaching and the other family members, they stuck to their boundaries. They weren't, taking calls unless he was ready to go to treatment. And they said, well, you can't come home. You've got two options. You can stay there or you can go to treatment that we have set up for you. Your choice. And the young man finally surrendered and said, okay, I will go to treatment. And as of this day, he's in treatment, has been there for a little over a week and a half, and is doing a great job. But the thing is, and what he told me is when I got him there, he told me I never would have made this change had it not been for my mom and my dad putting up those hard lines, because I never once thought my mom wouldn't let me come home. And so that's the piece of it. The intervention process is all about helping the family members develop those healthy boundaries and consequences if needed. And they're not developing healthy boundaries and consequences because they want to hurt their loved one. It's the exact opposite. They're doing it because they love them so much and nothing else has worked. And they're afraid of losing them to this disease of addiction. So by doing nothing, nothing changes. So coming up with these consequences and these boundaries are what create those changes. And it's so important. And I tell the families during the process, it's not just about the individual going to treatment either. It's about them maintaining and having that sustainable long-term recovery. Yeah. So it's about putting these boundaries and consequences into place. And you got to have those into place when they leave treatment because that's for the longevity. It's learning to have that sustainable recovery, not just going to treatment being the end goal. It's about maintaining sobriety and living a healthier life free of their addiction.
Many times we've had a lot of people who on the Recovered Life show that are in treatment, that run treatment. And, and they've said to me many times, and, and just friends who run treatment centers is like treatment many times is just a timeout. He goes, it's like a football team that's going bad and you were going to lose, but you need a timeout sometimes just to regroup and to refocus about what you actually can do and not do, right, in the circumstance. So he's like, timeout saves the game a lot of the time because it allows people to be regrouped. The actual recovery happens a lot of times outside of treatment. And I think that that's why a lot of times I think people, especially family members, think, hey, this person's going to go to treatment. Hey, they got the treatment. They should be able to, it should have worked, right? But as we all know from the statistics from treatment centers, is it doesn't work that way. Many people go out after treatment because they didn't really find a solution there. They just found a timeout, and maybe they were able to work it for a while, but need a little bit more.
Yep. That's a great point, Damon, and you're absolutely correct. It's the continuum. That continuity of care is what keeps people sober.
Yeah.
So it's about going to treatment, for X amount of days. But once you leave treatment, it's the maintenance piece. When you have the stages of change, you have pre-contemplation, contemplation, action, maintenance, and relapse. And relapse is there for a reason because people do it, right? So it's important to have that maintenance stage all worked out. The same thing when they're trying to go on a diet plan or lose weight, maintenance is always the hardest. We can jump into something, right? But maintaining is most often the hardest piece of the puzzle. So having those systems set up, whether that's, intensive outpatient or sober living or both, and also individual therapy and going to, AA meetings or NA meetings or, CODA meetings, whatever it may be. And what I find often is the individual who's struggling with addiction and their family, there's so much codependency there, right? And being able to get that other individual into codependency meetings or Al-Anon meetings as well, and the family system, so they can learn their healthier boundaries and learn to maintain, their own piece of this puzzle. So, it's all about learning to put your mask on first before you try to take care of others.
And I think as a recovered alcoholic, I just have to say, Eric, as somebody who's worked with a lot of people that are in recovery, whether through a 12-step program or coaching them or whatever, is like a lot of times I used to look at recovery as an all or nothing thing. Either people got it or they didn't get it. Recovery is not really like that. Speaking from somebody who's an alcoholic, is that, I know I have said things to people that they just did not get. I was maybe the first one to tell them the truth about what their relationship with alcohol really was, as opposed to what they were pretending it was. And deep down inside, they knew this, Eric, but were not ready for it. But yet 2 years later, I'll get a call and say, hey, Damon, you said this to me 2-3 years ago, and now I get it. Now I get it. And as I started going through recovery and working more and more with people who were trying to get sober and had a hard time, the more I realized is that, like, it's not an all or nothing game. I could spend time with somebody, Eric, and, they might not get it, and how many of those calls didn't I get that it actually worked for them, right? So, I think it's important to understand for people, to families, it's not an all or nothing thing. It could be 10, 20 years down the road. And I've told people, like, hey, I'm taking you to this meeting. This is where it's at. This is how you get it. This is what it's like. If you're not ready for it now, but in 10 years you are, they'll probably still be here. Right?
Mm-hmm.
And you can go then. It's not an all or nothing game.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree with that. It's all about planting those seeds, and hopefully that seed will get watered little by little and then sprout eventually, right? So,
Absolutely.
planting that seed in that loved one that you're talking about, your friend, your family, whoever it may be, and then making the change the day of, obviously that's ideal. That's what we want in a perfect world, but we don't live in a perfect world. We can only do what we can do, and that person has to ideally make that choice on their own terms, so that's what I love about the intervention process. We're trying to help create, a situation where that person can motivate to make that choice in a quicker timeline versus, waiting a longer period. However, that doesn't always happen. So, sometimes you plant that seed and down the road, that person makes that choice themselves, whether they've had a natural consequence that, kind of contributed to them making that choice, or their lifestyle has just changed for some reason. They make that choice on their own. So I see that happening as well, Damon. Very good point.
So Eric, final thoughts here for somebody, if maybe a family member's listening to this, a family is listening and saying, wow, we're just struggling over here. We have tried absolutely everything and should we just give up? Is there absolutely no hope? Should we, when do we throw in the towel, Eric? What is your final thought to them?
I always tell people if they're breathing, there's hope, so don't give up. Do everything that you can do, including reaching out to an interventionist, if you haven't done that yet, because the interventionist professional can help guide you and navigate that journey, because it's really challenging, and putting together the framework to create a successful intervention is really key to people oftentimes accepting treatment. And sometimes that may not be, the case. That may not be, reasonable for some families. And if not, then take care of yourself. Do the best you can to get to an Al-Anon meeting, to be able to connect with other individuals and families that are struggling with some of the same things, and take care of you, and learn to put those limits and boundaries into place through those Al-Anon meetings or those codependent anonymous meetings or what have you. Get your own individual therapy and realize, you can't make someone change. They have to want it themselves. The whole adage, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. Well, in my intervention process, I try to make them thirsty as hell for the water. That's my goal. I want to motivate them to want to drink that water that we're giving, and that's recovery. So to those families out there, if there's breathing, there's hope. Do all you can do, but do your best to not keep enabling the behaviors to continue, because by doing that, that person knows they can keep coming back for more. And that's the scary part. We have to set up those healthy boundaries for them so they realize that water spigot is being turned off and nothing else is coming out of it. And when that resource is running dry, that person is more likely than not to try to get help somewhere else.
Eric Reinhart, thank you so much for coming on the show today. Guys, we're going to put links on how you can get in touch with Eric if you want to speak with him. Thank you so much for coming on and sharing your experience with us today.
Thank you so much, Damon, for having me. It's been a pleasure. And I wish you guys all the best of luck out there if your individuals or family members are struggling.
Hey, if you like this episode, think about supporting us by becoming a Recovered Life Plus member. At Recovered Life TV, we're not just delivering premium recovery resources, we're empowering you with the knowledge and tools that make a real difference in the quality of your recovery. By subscribing, you gain access to ad-free content, expert insights, exclusive video and audio segments, special projects, plus so much more, all while supporting our mission to spread the recovery message far and wide. Whether you're seeking to deepen your understanding or stay updated on the latest addiction and mental health recovery trends, Recovered Life Plus is for you. Subscribe now and start living your best recovered life. Just go to recoveredlife.tv and become a Plus member today.